Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. I'm super stoked for today's topic. I know you're into all things space, and when I saw the news about India's SSLV-D3 mission, I thought, okay, we got to break this down.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. It's not every day you get to see a space agency testing out a brand new way to launch satellites.
Exactly. So we're talking about ISRO, India's space agency, right? They've been making waves with this Small Satellite Launch Vehicle program, or SSLV for short. But what's the big deal here? What's so special about this SSLV?
Well, think about all the small satellites, the mini, micro, nano ones.
Yeah, like the ones the size of a fridge, maybe even a small car.
Yeah, those. They need a ride to space too, right? But getting them up there used to be a hassle. Expensive, logistically complicated. The SSLV is designed to change all that.
So is this like a space Uber for satellites then?
Uh-huh. I like that analogy. Yeah, low cost, quick turnaround, launch on demand. It's about making space accessible, for universities, startups, even countries that haven't traditionally had the resources for big launches. Okay, I'm already intrigued. Now this mission is called SSLV-D3, right? What's with the D3? What does that signify?
So the D3 means it's the third developmental flight. It's like ISRO is taking the SSLV out for a test run, making sure everything's working as it should be.
So we're essentially witnessing the evolution of this rocket in real time.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about the rocket, though. This SSLV is carrying a very special passenger, the EOS-08 satellite. And there's also something called the SR-0 Dimosat riding along, too. Successfully putting them into orbit is another big objective for this mission.
EOS-08. That name has a nice ring to it. It sounds like the star of the show here. What makes this microsatellite so special?
Well, it's built on ISRO's standard microsatellite platform, but with some seriously cool upgrades.
Oh, so they're taking their tried and true design and then supercharging it.
You got it.
Yeah.
They've packed it with some cutting edge tech that's going to really push the boundaries of what these smaller satellites can do.
Okay, spill the beans. What kind of cool new tech are we talking about here?
All right, so first off, they've got this thing called an integrated avionics system. Basically, they've squeezed all the essential electronics for the satellite into one compact package. Communication systems, navigation, you name it.
So it's like they've created the ultimate space-saving design, right?
Precisely. And it doesn't stop there. They've also come up with this clever way to embed the printed circuit board, the PCB, right into the satellite's structural panel.
Wait, so the PCB is like part of the satellite's body. That's wild.
I know, right? It's all about saving space and weight, which is always crucial when you're launching things into orbit.
It's like they're taking Marie Kondo's decluttering principles to space.
Uh-huh. I love that. Oh, and we can't forget about the solar panels. Get this. They're flexible.
Whoa, flexible solar panels. What's the advantage of that?
Well, imagine unfurling these panels in space, like giant high-tech blankets. They can roll them up for launch, which saves space, then unfurl them once they're in orbit. It's a much more efficient way to generate power.
That is seriously impressive. I bet those antennas you mentioned earlier are pretty special too, right?
Oh, absolutely. They've got this micro-dual gimbal antenna, or MDGA for short. Think of it as the satellite's laser-focused communication tool. It allows for pinpoint accuracy when it comes to communicating with ground stations back on Earth.
That's like trying to thread a needle from hundreds of kilometers away. And what about that other antenna? The miniaturized phased array antenna.
That's another impressive piece of engineering. It's much smaller than traditional phased array antennas, but don't let that fool you. It packs a punch when it comes to transmitting data back to Earth.
Wow, all this cutting-edge tech is really mind-blowing. But what about EOS-08's actual mission? What's it going to do up there in space?
Well, EOS-08 has a busy schedule plan. It's carrying 3 main payloads, each with its own specific objectives, all about gathering valuable data about Earth and the space environment.
Okay, let's break those down one by one. What's the first payload?
The first one is the Electro-Optical Infrared Payload, or EOIR. Imagine a high-tech camera that can see things beyond what our human eyes can perceive.
Oh, like it can see in infrared, right?
Exactly. It captures images in various infrared bands, which are invisible to us, but reveal a ton of information about Earth's surface and atmosphere.
So it's kind of like giving EOS-08 superhuman vision. That's awesome. But what kind of information can we get from those infrared images?
All sorts of things. We can detect heat signatures, which is great for monitoring wildfires, volcanic activity, you name it. We can look at vegetation health, track pollution levels, even study the composition of the atmosphere.
So it's like having a constant eye in the sky, keeping tabs on the health of our planet.
Exactly. And the data collected by the EOIR will be incredibly valuable for researchers, scientists, and even governments. It can help us understand climate change, manage natural resources, and respond to disasters more effectively.
It's mind-boggling to think that a small satellite like EOS-08 can have such a big impact on our understanding of Earth. But hold on, there's more, right? What's the next payload?
Next up is the GNSS-R payload. GNSS-R stands for Global Navigation Satellite System Reflectometry.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Break it down for me. What exactly is GNSS-R?
Well, instead of receiving signals directly from navigation satellites like GPS, the GNSS-R payload actually listens for signals that have bounced off Earth's surface.
So it's using Earth as a giant mirror.
Yeah, kind of like that. By analyzing those reflected signals, scientists can figure out all sorts of things.
Like what? What kind of information can you get from bouncing signals off the Earth?
Well, they can measure ocean winds, track soil moisture, monitor ice formations, even map out flood zones.
Whoa, that's a lot of information for just bouncing signals around.
It's a pretty amazing technique, and it has a ton of potential applications, from predicting weather patterns to managing water resources.
This is all so fascinating, but we've got one more payload to cover, right? The SSLV-D3 dosimeter. You mentioned it was important for future human spaceflight.
It is. This little device measures ultraviolet radiation.
Ah, UV radiation, the stuff that gives us sunburns here on Earth. Why is that important in space?
Well, in space, you're outside the protection of Earth's atmosphere, so astronauts are exposed to much higher levels of UV radiation.
Right, and that can be pretty dangerous, leading to all sorts of health problems.
Exactly. So the SSLV-D3 dosimeter will track how much radiation is reaching the spacecraft. That's essential data for figuring out how to protect astronauts on future missions.
And this is especially crucial for India's upcoming Gaganyaan mission, right? The one where they're planning to send their own astronauts into space?
You got it. They need to make sure their astronauts are safe, and understanding the radiation environment is a big part of that.
It's incredible how a tiny device like this can play such a big role in the future of human space exploration.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is. What we learn from robotic missions like this one directly informs our plans for human spaceflight. But we've only scratched the surface of what this mission means. There's a lot more to explore, from the intricate flight sequence to the broader impact this could have on the global space industry.
I'm hooked. I can't wait to dive even deeper into all of that in part 2.
Welcome back. Are you ready to dig a little deeper into this mission?
You bet. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the SSLV. You said it's not just a scaled-down version of a regular rocket, right?
Right. One of the things that makes it so unique is the focus on keeping costs down. Traditional rockets, the big ones, they're super expensive to build and launch.
Yeah, I can imagine that price tag would be a big problem for smaller organizations, like a university or a startup that wants to get a satellite up there.
Exactly. So ISRO thought, how can we make this more affordable? And they really looked at every step of the process. They simplified the design, they used parts that are readily available.
So it's like they streamlined the whole manufacturing process, right?
Yep. And by making it simpler to assemble and get everything ready to launch, well, that means they can get these satellites up into space much faster.
That launch-on-demand thing we talked about before, that's going to be a huge advantage for satellite operators.
Right. No more waiting around for months or even years for a launch slot. They can launch when they need to.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense now. But you also mentioned that the SSLV needs less infrastructure. What does that mean?
Think about those giant launch pads they use for the bigger rockets. The SSLV doesn't need all that. It has a much smaller footprint.
So basically, it's more mobile and it costs less to operate.
Exactly. They've really thought outside the box to make this whole thing more efficient. And as they keep working on the SSLV, they're going to make even more improvements.
Now, you said this is a developmental flight, the third one. What does that mean exactly?
So it means they're still testing things out, making sure everything's running smoothly. The data from the first 2 flights, they use that to tweak the design, make improvements for this one.
So each launch is a learning experience.
You got it. It's all about making sure the SSLV is reliable, that it can consistently deliver satellites to orbit.
Makes sense. They want to build confidence for potential customers.
Absolutely. If this mission is a success, it's going to be huge, not just for India, but for the whole small satellite industry.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the rocket itself. Let's switch gears and talk about EOS-08. You mentioned it uses ISRO's standard platform for microsatellites.
Yeah, it's built on what they call the IMS-1 bus. Think of it like a base model car.
The foundation that they can then build on.
Right. It provides all the basics, like the power system, the attitude control, the communications, and then they can customize it for each mission.
So it saves them time and money, and they can focus on these specific instruments and technology they need for each satellite?
Exactly. And with EOS-08, they've really taken that customization to the next level. Remember that integrated avionics system we talked about?
Yeah, packing all those electronics into one small unit.
It's a great example of how they're making things smaller and more efficient. Instead of having all these separate boxes taking up space, they combined it all into one neat package.
And what about the structural design? Embedding the circuit board right into the panel, that was pretty cool.
It is. Instead of having separate circuit boards that add a lot of weight and bulk, they figured out a way to build them right in.
Smart. Oh, and those flexible solar panels, they're still blowing my mind.
I know, right? It's a clever way to save space during launch.
And then they just unfurl them in orbit like magic. So cool. And those antennas, too, they're not your average antennas, are they?
Nope. We've got the MDGA, which allows for incredibly precise communication with ground stations.
I can even imagine trying to aim a signal that accurately from hundreds of kilometers up.
It's a challenge. And then there's that miniaturized phased array antenna. Super compact, but still really powerful.
Okay, I think I'm finally getting a handle on all this incredible tech, but I gotta ask, what are they hoping to achieve with all this? What's the main goal of the EOS-08 mission?
It's all about the data. Remember those three payloads, the EOIR, the GNSS-R, and the SICK-UV dosimeter. Each one is designed to gather information about Earth and space.
Right. Let's break those down a bit more, starting with the EOIR.
The EOIR, that's the electro-optical infrared payload. It's like a super-powered camera that can see in infrared.
So it can see things that are invisible to us.
Yeah. Think heat signatures, vegetation health, pollution levels. It's going to give us a whole new perspective on our planet.
It's like having a satellite with X-ray vision. That's awesome.
Right. And the data from the EOIR, it's going to be super valuable for all sorts of things, from tracking wildfires to monitoring climate change.
Wow, this one little instrument can do so much. What about the GNSS-R payload? You said it uses a pretty unique technique.
It does. It's called GNSS-R, which stands for Global Navigation Satellite System Reflectometry. Basically, it listens for signals from GPS satellites that are bounced off the Earth's surface.
Wait, so it's using the Earth as a giant mirror to gather data. That's brilliant.
It is. And by analyzing those reflected signals, they can figure out things like ocean winds, soil moisture, even ice formations.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. So much information just from bouncing signals off the Earth.
It's a really versatile technique, and it's still relatively new. So the data from this mission will help them refine the technology even further.
It's amazing how they're constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Now, we can't forget about that third payload, the SICK-UV dosimeter. You said it's especially important for human spaceflight.
It is. Remember how we talked about UV radiation being a big concern in space? Well, the 6UV dosimeter, it's going to measure those radiation levels very precisely.
So they can figure out how to keep astronauts safe from that radiation.
That's the goal. And this data is going to be super important for India's Gaganyaan mission, their human spaceflight program.
Right, they're going to need all the information they can get to make sure their astronauts are protected.
And this little device, it's playing a big role in making that happen. It's incredible to think about, isn't it?
It is a small satellite gathering data that will help us understand our planet better and pave the way for future human exploration.
Exactly. But we've only just scratched the surface of what this mission means. There's still so much to unpack, from the bigger picture of India's space program to the impact this could have on the global space industry.
Welcome back. So we've talked about the tech, we've talked about the mission, but I'm curious, what does this whole thing mean for India? Where do they fit in with all this global space stuff going on?
Well, they're already a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. This SSLV program, it just puts them further on the map, shows everyone they're serious about space.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, their missions to the moon and Mars, Chandrayaan and Mangalyaan, those were huge achievements.
Yeah, exactly. And they did it all on a much smaller budget than a lot of other space agencies. Shows you what they're capable of.
I think it's really inspiring, actually. They're really pushing the limits, showing what's possible. And with this SSLV, it seems like they're not just focused on themselves, they're trying to make space more accessible for everyone.
You got it. You know, we've talked about this idea of democratizing space.
Yeah, making it so it's not just for governments and big companies.
Right. So traditionally, launching a satellite, it's been, well, a really expensive and complicated thing to do. But the SSLV changes that. It makes it more affordable, more flexible.
So suddenly you've got universities, startups, even smaller countries that can actually get involved.
Exactly. Imagine a future where anyone with a good idea can launch a satellite. That's the potential here.
That's a pretty awesome thought. So more research, more innovation, all because it's easier to get to space.
Right. It could completely change the game. And it's not just about the science, it's about the economics, too.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Building and launching these rockets, that's got to be a huge boost to India's economy.
Oh, absolutely. It creates jobs, it brings in investment, it helps develop new technologies that can be used in other areas, too.
So it's like a ripple effect, right? Space exploration leading to advancements that benefit everyone.
Exactly. And the best part is, it's all happening in a sustainable way. They're really setting a good example for the rest of the world.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I mean, we started with the nuts and bolts of a rocket launch, and now we're talking about the future of space exploration and how it can benefit everyone.
It's been a great conversation for sure. And I think the most important thing to take away from all this is that space, it's not just about rockets and satellites. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, about working together to solve big problems. It's about inspiring the next generation of explorers and innovators. And with programs like the SSLV, we're seeing that happen right before our eyes.
You know what? You're absolutely right. It's been a real privilege to learn about this mission. It gives me hope for the future. And for everyone listening out there, keep looking up. Who knows what amazing things we'll discover next?